Adventures of Donald McQueen. Bibliographer. Volume 2, Chapter 1. The Return of the Mack. Queen. My name is Donald McQueen, and I am a bibliographer. And these are my adventures. To be precise, this is the beginning of the second volume of my adventures, and much has happened in the 3 years since the final fascicle of the first volume appeared to much popular and critical acclaim in the 91st year of the reign of Elizabeth II. I have much to tell you. Of the continuing battles between the protagonists vying for the presidency of the Bibliographical Society of London, of the giant rat of Sumatra, a tale for which the world is not, perhaps, quite ready, of the further crimes of the apparently animated, indeed demonic, ventriloquist's dummy, Mr. Lavender, and of the haunting of Timor Mortis College, where I am Professor Emeritus of Bibliography, by the ghosts of 2 disgruntled librarians, victims, it turns out, of the serial killer who has become known as Jack the Quipper, who leaves a little joke at the scene of his crimes, and I will get around to all these stories in due course. I regret to inform you, however, that I have still not solved the great mystery of the Codex Assinorum, though I do have hopes of doing so during the course of the publication of this, the second volume of my adventures, and I do have several new and hot leads in my investigations. I am writing from my study at Timor Mortis College, here in the beautiful elephant-haunted city of Noxford. I am surrounded by my books and my research notes, and my beloved cat, Doggerel, is sleeping noisily in front of a roaring fire, though it is mid-morning and the sun is shining brightly upon the twisted and leaning spires of the city of books. Ah, Noxford, ancient seat of learning, former centre of European biscuit manufacture, and a name associated with so many noble concepts and products. There is, of course, Frank Stupper's famous Noxford gingerbread, and the almost unbelievably well-known Noxford bags and Noxford brogues, a group of disgusting old slatterns and a series of incomprehensible local accents, respectively. Who has not heard of the Noxford movement, a peculiarly unpleasant bowel condition, or the Noxford Union, both a rebellious organised group of local biscuit traders and a slang term for a morganatic marriage? Then there is the Noxford comma, a particularly beautiful amber butterfly, not to be confused with the Noxford coma, into which many students of sociology slip during lectures. But enough of the city. Since I last addressed my readers, I was approached by an emissary of Her Majesty, the Queen, who informed me that she dearly wished to confer upon me a knighthood for my innumerable services to bibliography and thereby humanity. But I was obliged to turn this honour down, on the grounds that the honorific system is essentially bankrupt, and had been rendered worthless by centuries of abuse in the service of hollow patriotism and of mammon, and that, in my opinion, Her Majesty smells of poo. I concluded by noting that the only Queen I would bend the knee to was Quentin Crisp, and he was, sadly, no longer with us. I was sorry in some ways, as Professor Sir Donald McQueen sounded moderately well when I tried saying it, slowly, using various different accents, in front of the mirror in the toilets of the branch of Spearmint Hippo, the select club for gentlemen with more belly than horn, in Noxford's Broadish Street, before I wrote to the aforementioned emissary, enclosing a small piece of excrement, not my own, of course, but something I had collected at Spearmint Hippo. That was, of course, before Her Majesty passed away, to be replaced upon the throne by a likeable clown she once brought home from Covent Garden, where he had been performing in an humorous sketch troupe, undertaking a parody of the musical ensemble known as the Black and White Minstrels, and had not been able to shake off in 40 years. King Coco, as he is now, also wrote to me, via an actuary, to return the fragment of excrement I had sent to his late adopted mother, and to beg me to reconsider my position and kneel before the throne to accept that ancient chivalric title. But I was firm, and wrote upon the slightly malodorous, crested and gilded envelope, "Return to sender." The completion of the part publication of the first volume of these my adventures has been met, as I have said, with considerable critical acclaim. The London Review of Adventures described it as Just the sort of thing our readers would like, I should think, while the Philistine Literary Supplement called it the greatest contribution to the nervous well-being of the nation since the invention of Mogadam, which was a great compliment, as Mogadam was invented by the family of the Philistine's owner, Sir Rex Dastardly, a bloated Australian cod-liver oil magnate. On the other hand, the Monitor, the leading organ for lizards and other reptiles, described it as childish twaddle. These reviews naturally had no effect upon sales of the great work, which has flown from the shelves of booksellers, real and virtual, in vast numbers, and been delivered across the world by those one-breasted warrior women who seem to have found employment in that sphere. Then there has been the highly successful moving picture adaptation of the first volume of my adventures, upon which subject I shall say more anon. As a result, I am now both rich and famous, and rich, and have had to turn down several other dubious invitations in addition to that from the palace. I was asked to endorse Wormwood's mustard, advertised as the hottest, reddest mustard on the market, the very bastard of mustards, the great bastard of mustards, the last and best bastion of mustardness, the rusty master of mustards, and, for some reason, the rear admiral of mustards. But although their representatives clustered round me, jostled and bristled as they thrust gold into my truss, wheedled and at last grew flustered and blustered, I told them, much as I enjoyed their mustard, I must remain true to the greatest condiment the world has ever known, Schickelgruber's tomato ketchup, the only ketchup which can make a rotting rat taste good.
Schickelgruber's tomato ketchup.
Schickelgruber, 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 Schickelgruber.
Schickelgruber's tomato ketchup.
Schickelgruber, 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 Schickelgruber.
Makes even a rotting rat taste good.
Tastes good.
I do wonder if their current advertising campaign quite hits the mark. Other invitations I have been obliged to turn down came from Dame Lucy Worsley, that was an unexpected offer of concubinage, the Royal Society for Raising Money for Itself, which invited me to become a fellow at the cost of £3,900 per annum, the Friendly Bomb Company of Norwich, which invited me to become the face of its cluster bombs before a planned deployment in Slough, and something called Strictly Come Dancing, which turned out to be a television programme. At the age of 74, I would have been the oldest contestant yet, but I watched the programme for the first time and was so struck by the inhumanity and asininity of the proceedings that I howled like a dog, and my neighbour in the next suite of rooms at Timor Mortis, Professor of Mixology Maximilian Fox, ran in to check that I was not spontaneously combusting. My beloved cat, Doggerel, who was resting in my lap at the time, was sick, no doubt as a direct result of watching Strictly Come Dancing. But I am troubled by my fame and the notoriety of the first volume of my memoir, not so much for the reactions of the swinish multitude and the vast machine of international commerce, nor for the ill reflection which such fame may cast upon the gravity of my research, and my status as the nation's, and perhaps the world's, leading living bibliographer, although I am naturally concerned about that, but because every one of the millions who have read my book or witnessed the movie based upon it now knows that I possess the ear trumpet of death. The reader will recall, I am sure, how I found this worn but beautiful auditory aid on the steps of the library of Timor Mortis College at the very start of the first fascicle of my adventures. Indeed, the finding and use of the trumpet was the occasion for my beginning the publication of the work you are now holding in your hands, or watching on the silver screen, if Mr. Steepleburke, or whatever his name is, decides to shoot the Adventures of Donald McQueen, Bibliographer 2. I have found that a good many people who have read the story do not believe the ear trumpet to exist, but consider it a mere literary device or an imaginative invention, and I should perhaps encourage that view. But honesty, veracity, decency, integrity, accuracy, sincerity, and modesty, known as the 7 pillars of bibliography, and therefore of life, oblige me to state that the trumpet is real and is here in the side pocket of my bibliographer's smock as I write these words. I am concerned lest someone should try to steal the ear trumpet of death from me, and indeed there have already been 2 attempts. Last year, shortly after the appearance of the last fascicle of my adventures, I was accosted on the street outside the college by an urchin.
Begging your pardon, sir, But would you be willing to view a simple collational formula which my humble hand has, I'm sure, very carelessly drafted?
What was that you said?
Please, sir, correct me collational formula. It's here on this scrap of creased and soiled paper.
The urchin removed a folded scrap of creased and soiled paper from a ragged pocket in his creased and soiled trousers and held it out towards me with an imploring look. What are you about, young fellow?
Well, your lordship, I asks myself, what a rich and handsome gentleman like yourself might want from a pitiful and worthless scrap of humanity like me. And I answers myself thuswise, that being so benevolent and elegant of appearance, with your silky beard and smock and all you might want is a sexual favour, which I, being a product of the Me Too generation, is disinclined to grant. So failing that, I thinks to myself, well, what does such a kind-hearted and well-set-up gentleman want if he does not want, or is not going to get, a knee-trembler or a pot-swizzler? And I answers myself that he likes nothing better than to correct the bibliographical failings of others, and might be willing to pay just a few pennies for the pleasure. So, sir, for £1 I will give you this scrap of paper. And for another £1 I will let you correct the collational formula which I have, no doubt highly inaccurately, scribbled upon it. Or if you prefer, sir, I will give you for a shiny £1 this scrap of creased and soiled paper.
The urchin fished around in his pocket, withdrew a second folded scrap of paper which he held out in the other hand.
Which bears the no doubt profoundly flawed quasi-facsimile transcription of the title page of a copy of Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan of 1651, which in the humble opinion of this urchin exists in 3 distinct editions, only one of which can genuinely be dated to that year.
At this my eyes naturally lit up. What bibliographer worth his salt would not be tempted by such an offer? But I remained cautious. I would like to correct your nascent bibliographical efforts, young urchin, but first I should perhaps correct your use of the term collational. That is, I am afraid, an ugly Americanism, coined by that barely literate hornswoggler, Professor Harrison D. Flowers of Mons Veneris University, California, and carelessly adopted by some gullible European bibliographers. There is no need to coin a bogus adjective from the noun collation, since that noun can, quite legitimately, be used in an adjectival sense. So it is correct to refer not to a collational formula, but to a collation formula.
I am most exceedingly grateful to your lordship for this excellent advice. I will henceforth always use the term collation formula, and may the devil tear out me tongue and whip away all me internal organs if the word collational ever passes me lips again, sir. Except, of course, in the context of explaining that the word should never be used. And I will not point out never, and to no one, sir, that the term was first used not by Harrison Flowers in the Americas, but by Sir Willie Winky Grudge in the holy smoke of Cambridge, and was adopted by such luminaries as Philippa Gasbag and even Michael Ribwright.
Michael Ribwright would never use the word collational. I was beginning to suspect that this urchin might know something about bibliography, and might even know that I was an emeritus professor of that subject. It seemed a little unlikely that he had been hanging about in one of the streets of Noxford's immense university plexus in the hope of gaining a few pounds by this means from any old professor who happened to emerge from a college.
So please, Your Honour, do look at my collation formula, or my quasi-facsimile transcription, or both, and give me a few pounds for the pleasure of correcting me innocent and misguided ways.
It was at that moment that I felt a stirring in the side pocket of my bibliographer's smock, and looked down to see a plump and furry paw thrust therein. I looked up from the paw, and there was a womble, with the shiftiest look upon his long face that I have ever seen. He was after the ear-trumpet of death. Wombles are normally the most honest and industrious of creatures, but when a womble goes bad, he is the first among criminals. When a womble goes underground, as well as overground, and wombling free of apprehension by the police, who seem incapable of catching the furry miscreants, they are not so much making good use of the things that they find, things that the everyday folk leave behind, as robbing those everyday folk of the things they still possess, and making evil use of the things that they have stolen. People just don't notice them. They never see under their noses a womble may be. They pilfer by night and they pilfer by day, looking for treasure to spirit away. I had heard tales of a gang of recidivist wombles who were working the streets of Noxford in collaboration with a group of young human pickpockets under the direction of Father Abraham, who had formerly been the gang leader of that most despicable of species, the Smurfs. These wombles were organised, they worked as a team, these wombles were villains, these wombles were mean, and one of them was after my trumpet. Although he had not yet managed to get his paws upon it, I raised at once the cry of, "Stop, thief!"
We've been rumbled! Quick, leg it, lads!
So saying, the urchin legged it, and so did the shifty-looking womble, along with several other urchins and wombles which I now perceived disguised as construction workers, motorcycle cops, marines, gay bikers, cowboys and Red Indians in the crowd. That was the first attempt to steal my precious trumpet. The second was a more subtle affair, involving, I am sorry to say, my beloved pussycat, Doggerel. One beautiful spring day, some 2 years after the first volume of my adventures had been completed, my diary tells me it was the 23rd of May in the year 2023, I returned from giving a lecture to the Noxford Bibliographical Society, a local shadow of the Bibliographical Society of London, largely peopled by pinheads and muppets, but with a genuine interest in that gay science, a lecture on the state of my research into the mystery of the Codex Assinorum, in which I naturally kept back the best of my findings and conclusions for my imminent and transformational monograph, to find my beloved companion absent. At first I hardly noticed. Although he often rushes to greet me when I enter my rooms at Timor Mortis, he is sometimes elsewhere, hunting mice or sparrows, or attending the Spanish class which he takes every Wednesday evening. He also sings sometimes in the college chapel choir, so his absence went unremarked. As I sat down to peruse the latest volume of the national organ of the Bibliographic Society, usually known by its popular acronym of No BS, the American equivalent of the Journal of the Bibliographical Society of London, and almost as good. Interestingly, the acronym can also be read as NOBS, but is only ever so read by the mischievous and facetious, and all mature individuals refer to the journal as No BS. And NOBS, of course, has another meaning here in this city of learning, standing for the Noxford Operatic and Balletic Society, of which my brother Starwheel is a leading light. That night, when Doggerel failed to appear for his tray of sparrow giblets, I began to worry in earnest, and when he had not returned by the morning, my brow was deeply furrowed. Could he have been shut in the cheese cellar by accident? He does have a weakness for soft cheeses. Or could he perhaps have been struck by one of the hansom cabs and four-wheelers which ply up and down Noxford's Broadish Street at all hours? But no, he was too canny an old alley-cat to have succumbed to any such accident. I was considering reporting his loss to the college authorities and to the police, when I heard an urgent tapping at my casement. I crossed to the window and was surprised to see, standing on the sill, a woodpecker. And not a rare, lesser-spotted, or a common, greater-spotted woodpecker, but the middling rare and somewhat larger green variety. I opened the window, knocking the bird from his perch in a comical manner. The woodpecker laughed. Green woodpeckers are renowned for their sense of humour, recovered himself and flew in at the window, alighting on my breakfast table, where he began to peck furiously at the oak surface. After a moment, I perceived, tied to his right leg, a small cylinder of some shiny metal. The woodpecker raised his leg, allowing me to untie the cord which held the cylinder in place, and I unscrewed the end and drew out and unrolled the smallest ransom note I had ever seen. It was only 5 by 3 centimetres in size, and had been manufactured in the traditional way, by cutting out characters from some printed source and pasting them onto a piece of paper to form a message. The source chosen was not some newspaper headline or magazine advertisement, but, I discovered when I looked at the note through my glass, a text page of the Journal of the Bibliographical Society of London. It must have been immensely fiddly to cut out and paste down all those characters on so small a scale, but I supposed it had been necessary in order to make a note small enough to fit into the carrier woodpecker's leg receptacle. The text was, disgracefully, all in capitals, and read in the following way. McQueen, I have your cat. You will deliver the ear trumpet of death to me. I was surprised to find that my voice reverberated sinisterly even when reading those words from a ransom note. By leaving it in the horn of the statue of Sooty outside the Bibliboblion by tea-time tomorrow. I will then return your cat. Signed, a friend. P.S. If you fail, or call the cops, as I might expect from someone so foolish as not to understand that vellum and parchment are essentially the same material, I will have doggerel stuffed. I was naturally appalled and discomfited by this turn of events, and considered giving up the trumpet. The statue of Sooty outside the Bibliobobblion is, of course, a well-known landmark in the city. It depicts in marble the once-loved alumnus of Black Nobler College holding high a horn of plenty, from which the plenty was sadly stolen some years ago, leaving the horn empty. Sooty has now, of course, been disgraced, and since his involvement in both the arms trade and the promotion of equity release has been made public, there have been moves to have all the carvings and portraits of the Silent Bear removed from Noxford. Sooty himself was found guilty of firearms offences and war crimes at Noxford Assizes in 2016 and condemned to 30 years penal servitude. At the trial he refused to speak, but whispered in the ear of his counsel on several occasions, and at one point took out a small magic wand, which he waved to cries of "Izzy Wizzy, let's get busy!" from the gallery, to no apparent effect. When the judge passed sentence, the criminal was seen to take out a small pistol. How he had managed to smuggle such a thing into the building is still a matter for conjecture, which he levelled at His Honour Justice Pickering, causing panic in the courtroom. It turned out to be a water pistol, with which he attempted to soak His Honour, but the failing power in his little paws and the small size of the weapon resulted in a feeble spurt which reached less than halfway towards the throne of justice. Sooty was taken away in chains, but served little of his sentence, for he was murdered in his cell the following year, apparently by Kermit the Frog. The statue at the Bibliobobblion has been the focus of several protests, and students have more than once tried to topple it, so far without success. The new and enlightened proto-bibliothecarius of the library has promised to remove the statue as soon as he can raise the funds, and replace it with a marble representation of Sooty's late brother, Sweep, formerly believed to be a rogue criminal among the Corbett family, but now rehabilitated, or possibly of Ramsbottom, the Yorkshire serpent, who later founded a charity to help and support Sooty's victims. I pictured myself wrapping the ear trumpet in a green velvet cloth and placing it in the empty horn of Sooty. I would have gladly given up the precious object to save doggerel, but then I bridled at the awful cheek of the kidnapper and noticed two factors which immediately suggested the name of the despicable individual involved. That ignorant jibe about vellum and parchment, I had heard that before. And did I know a reader of the Journal of the Bibliographical Society of London who both viewed the publication with so little respect that he would cut it up for his own ends, and was known to be a woodpecker trainer? I did. I recognised this outrage as the work of Cornelius Bunce. Bunce, my arch-enemy and the worst bibliographer in the world, the organiser of half that is evil and nearly all that is undetected in the city of books, the Napoleon of bibliographical crime. This was, of course, before Bunce published his monograph on the dung pellets of Patagonia and Australasia, and I perceived at once that he hoped to use the ear trumpet to take a shortcut or two in his research, as well as for who knows what other foul ends. And he had the effrontery to kidnap my beloved feline and threaten me with his stuffage. I would not allow it, so I at once reported the crimes of blackmail and catnapping to the police, and together we staked out the statue of Sooty that Thursday evening, having placed a Cornish pasty wrapped in green velvet in the empty horn of the statue. But, to my disappointment, Bunce did not come to retrieve the prize himself, but sent instead his manservant, an Andaman Island pygmy known as Little Dave Wilkins. He did rather stand out in the quadrangle of the Bibliobobblion, being the only tiny black man, naked save for a skirt woven of human hair and a colourful embroidered sash, with a crown of dyed parakeet feathers on his head, short dreadlocks decorated with small bones and carrying a spear, that the quadrangle had seen that day. Sadly, he was too short to reach the horn of the statue, even when standing on its plinth, and had to appeal for help to a passer-by. That passer-by was me, heavily disguised with a false black beard covering my real white beard. I put on an Irish accent. "Why, little fellow, would you like me to lift you up to that horn?"
"Yes, thank you, sir."
I grabbed Dave Wilkins by the waist and raised him until he could almost reach the green velvet-wrapped pasty in the horn, then whisked him down to the ground and retained a firm grip upon him by the loincloth which he was wearing beneath his skirt. "Aha!" I cried. "I have you now, you little turd!"
I am no turd, sir, but only the unwilling creature of an evil master.
At this moment, the two constables who had been hidden in the crowd, which usually throngs the quadrangle, made themselves known. But Dave Wilkins was too quick for them. He squirmed out of his loincloth, poked me in the ribs with his spear, which was thankfully artificial, so did no damage, and ran with remarkable speed and agility between the legs of one of the constables and out of the quadrangle. Both policemen did a double-take, then looked at one another, then did another double-take, then ran after Dave Wilkins with their truncheons out. I also gave chase, but although a remarkable physical specimen, my 74 years told on me, and I was scarcely able to keep up with the fleeing pygmy and officers of the law. They ran into Broadish Street, past Timor, Mortis and Brasenose colleges, turned into the Hash Market, and sped thence to the High Street, which is naturally the next thoroughfare after the Hash Market, past Mons Veneris and Lady Garden, St. Lancelot and Clarkson. Here it seemed the pursuers had lost their quarry. I saw the constables stop and look at one another again, then do a triple take before they eventually caught sight of Wilkins and renewed their pursuit. We all three continued our headlong course along High Street, and into Unlikely Lane, which is a narrow passage leading to the cobbled Nobler Street, where several colleges stand in a line, like buses awaiting the arrival of a ticket inspector. We passed Merkin College and Black Nobler, which gives the street its name, and the last I saw of Dave Wilkins was his tiny, black and feather-crested figure diving through the cat-flap of the great double doors of St. Ivel College. The policeman could not follow, though one of them tried, but could only get his head through the flap before he became stuck. The doors were firmly locked, it being after curfew, although it was barely later than tea-time, so by the time the sleepy custodian had been roused from his box by the ringing of the doorbell and had come down to see what all the fuss was about, little Dave Wilkins had vanished. A thorough search of the college was made, but of the Andaman Islander or his wicked one-legged master there was no sign. A small gap was found in the wall of the kitchen garden, where there was a smudge of blood on the brickwork, and a discarded parakeet feather, dyed bright red, lay upon the pavement just outside, so it was assumed that the miscreant had escaped that way. It was no coincidence, I am sure, that Dave Wilkins chose to run to St. Ivel College, for that is now the home of his master, the egregious Professor Cornelius Bunce. Bunce, Bunce, Bunce. My exact contemporary at Noxford, and for the past 50 years and more, my bitter rival at St. Ivel, or St. Evil, as it's sometimes known. Bunce played the innocent, but the police knew well enough that he was behind the catnapping. But without Wilkins, and ideally his confession, they could take the matter no further, despite my pointing out the obvious connections between Bunce and Wilkins, and the fact that the ransom note had been delivered by a green woodpecker. Among Bunce's few and curious talents is the training of wild animals to do his bidding, a power which he claims to have been taught by Wilkins, and which he exercises particularly over mountain gorillas, elephants and woodpeckers, especially green woodpeckers. But the investigating officer, Chief Inspector Nick Buckle of Plum Valley Police, determined that this was too tenuous a link to make a case against Bunce, although he conceded that the professor was probably the mastermind of the enterprise. From that moment forth, of course, little Dave Wilkins was a wanted man, and the police of 4 counties, Noxford, Bikeshire, Ducklinghamshire, and for some reason Cornhole, sought him with vigour. It was a brief hunt, however, for his body was found 3 days later, stuffed into a canvas kit bag and thrown into the River Plum, weighted down with carelessly forged currency. There were more than 70 3.5-pound coins. He had been stabbed with a butter knife. I thought at first that Bunce must have done the deed himself to silence his erstwhile manservant, but then rumours fluttered about Noxford that Wilkins had been seen and heard having a loud altercation in Tedious Passage on the night before his body was found with a man smaller than himself, a dwarf wearing a violet-coloured jacket and no trousers. So perhaps he had been murdered by Mr. Lavender, generally held to be a psychotic animated ventriloquist dummy, although I find it hard to believe this is the case, and suspect that an evil dwarf is impersonating Mr. Lavender in order to commit crimes in his name. What a lot of murderers there seem to be in Noxford just at the moment. I was at this stage still tremendously worried about Doggerel, of course, and feared that Bunce would carry out his threat to have him stuffed. I fretted in my college room for 24 hours after the disappearance of Dave Wilkins, fearing the rat-tat-tat of another woodpecker with a new ultimatum. But none came, and an idea occurred to me. Perhaps I could use the ear-trumpet of death to determine the whereabouts of my beloved companion. I took it out from its hiding place. Since recent events, I had taken to storing it in, well, I had better not give the location away to the readers of this chapter of my adventures, and always carried it, when I carried it, in the front pocket rather than the side pocket of my bibliographer's smock, and, fitting it to my ear-hole, bent my mind upon the furry features and vicious teeth and claws of that feline celebrity. But once more I failed. Instead of finding myself approaching the prison of my companion, I began to pick up radio waves from the recent past. While I may have remarked that the Archer's Family is the worst program on the wireless, I now found myself listening to its antithesis, the best of programs.
And now, on BBC Radio Noxford, Dr. Thinley's Casebook, the everyday story of haunted Scottish medical folk.
Dr. Thinley's Casebook, with Andrew Crookback as Dr. Cameron, Barbara Solon as Janet, and Bill Simpleton as Dr. Thinley. This week, the Tarachbray Horror, written by Smudgemin de Poe and adapted for the wireless by Hamish Thistlecock.
Dr. Cameron, I do miss Dr. Thinley.
Aye, Janet, the place just is not the same without him. I'm right here, you stupid woman. Can you no see me?
Sometimes, you know, I think I catch sight of him out of the corner of my eye, but I turn to look and it's only the curtain waving in the breeze, or some porridge rising up out of a bowl and forming itself into a man-like shape, as it so often does, or the vicar, or that old man covered in hair who lives next door coming round to borrow a cup of sugar, or that mad woman from the post office having escaped her straitjacket, or a pair of dogs walking round one on the shoulders of the other in a beige overcoat, or a moose in a snood which has somehow wandered into the house, or a gaggle of geese forming an acrobatic pyramid in the front garden, or an escaped pope fleeing from the Calvinists, or...
Aye, Janet, grief can have terrible consequences for a weak-minded woman like yourself. But these sightings of Dr. Thinley are only in your imagination, woman. The man is dead and buried, and there's no such thing as ghosts. Tell yourself that, Janet, next time you see a pope or some porridge and mistake it for our erstwhile friend.
You are no doubt right, Dr. Cameron.
Obviously the two of them could not see me, but I saw them well enough, and heard them too as they discussed my curious demise.
Was it not a curious demise which Dr. Thinley suffered, Dr. Cameron?
Aye, it was that, Janet. Who would have thought a youngish man like Thinley would have succumbed to the Atlantean flu and fallen from his bike in a state of delirium over the edge of the cliff into the sea?
Do you mean the Atlantic flu?
No, Janet, I mean the Atlantean flu. It did not come from the Atlantic, but from the lost city of Atlantis, which, as you know, lies just under the ocean a little way to the north of the cove of Tarachbray. It seems he found a curious green glass bottle on the beach, and opened it to find it contained Atlantean ale which he quaffed, swallowing down the flu bacteria which made him giddy and caused him to lose control of his bicycle. That's no how it happened at all, Dr. Cameron. I found that bottle right enough, but it was empty, and I was pushed from my bike as I rode home that evening by the hands of a man you ken all too well. And then there's the strange tale of what happened to me under the ocean with a mermaid and the king of the sea.
But enough of this chatter, Dr. Cameron. No doubt there are patients for you in the waiting room now. I know Mrs. McLeavy has been here since 1922, and young Alistair McGowan has been holding his severed ear in place since last Thursday.
You're right, Janet. I must get to work. There's much to do, and the task will be all the greater and harder until we can find a replacement for Dr. Finlay. So I followed Cameron through to the surgery at Ardenhouse and stood behind him as he met his patients that morning. It was mostly quotidian medical work. Mrs. McLeavy had apparently died and been reincarnated as a tortoise while she had been waiting, or perhaps her body had simply rotted to dust and blown away in the breeze, and a random tortoise had wandered in and taken up her chair. But in any case, the patient was now a tortoise, and so Cameron whisked it off to Mr. Yellowly, the veterinarian. Young McGowan's ear had been held so long against the wound in the side of his head that it had reattached itself of its own accord, and no stitches were necessary. Nancy McFancy's pregnancy was proceeding adequately, and old Mr. McFuttle was in with his usual complaint, which was quickly dealt with by Cameron with a hot towel and 3 mildly racist jokes. There were the usual faintly absurd, amusing and alliterative, rhyming or anagrammatical ailments. Peggy Whipple had a peg stuck to a nipple. Fergus Douglas had a humongous fungus on his tragus, while his sister Inga had a blister on her finger. Miles and Dennis Rawls both had piles like tennis balls. His mother had brought wee Jimmy Ure in for penile incontinence. Christy Crick had a crusty crack, and Alan Fisher an anal fistula. Richie Pollock had an itchy bollock, just the one, naturally, while Rory Loeb had a sore earlobe. Maggie Ramage and Aggie Shand had each caused damage to the other's hand. Neither of us could quite work out how. Jock Magooley was prescribed a new truss. Fanny Burns reported some slight genital inflammation, while Willie Green had a more serious problem. Old Dan McGough had a cold and a cough, as did Mary Ann Irving, which was fairly unnerving. Neither Dick Fell nor John Thomas Doolittle could get it up, while Everard Kinghorn and Hardy Woodyard couldn't bring it down. Walter McGee had water on the knee. Walter McBain had water on the brain, while his brother, Sexton McBain, had sex on the brain, and so forth. But the next patient was new to me.
Do sit down, sir, and tell me your name and what ails you.
A youngish man had entered the surgery. Tall and lean and dressed in workman's clothes, his face was unshaven, and his eyes shone like 2 bright pennies on either side of his hawk-like nose. I don't mean that his nose was shaped like a hawk. That would be absurd. Rather, it was shaped like a hawk's nose. The stranger spoke.
I am Archie Slender.
That's a rough throat you have there, Mr. Slender. Do you ken what's wrong with you?
Yes, demonic possession.
Really? So you think you're possessed by a demon, do you? That's more a case for the Kirk than for Ardenhouse, I'm thinking.
I went to see the Reverend Mack Portillo, and he would not believe that I was possessed, and he told me to come here for a diagnosis.
I, too, do not believe in demonic possession, Mr. Slender.
You didn't believe in bloody ghosts either, but I'm here right enough.
I tell you, I am mastered by an emissary of hell who has taken over my body and mind and forces me to perform vile and unspeakable acts of sexual depravity.
And with whom have you been performing these vile and unspeakable acts?
With Janet Macpherson, your housekeeper.
I think you're mistaken, Mr. Slender. If you and Janet have been performing depraved sexual acts, I'm quite sure it was at her instigation. It was nothing to do with any diabolical influence. She does love all that kind of thing.
Be that as it may, I am possessed.
Well, something is certainly affecting your accent, Mr. Slender. It's all over the place. Perhaps I will take a wee peep at your throat all the same, to see if I cannot find an earthly cause for your hoarseness. Now open up, Mr. Slender, and show me your tonsils.
Cameron stumbled awkwardly around his desk and peered into Mr. Slender's open mouth. At this moment, something quite extraordinary happened. Slender's jaws, which were wide open, opened wider still, until they seemed impossibly wide apart, his mouth seeming to present a hole as large as the rest of his face. Cameron goggled and opened his mouth, and at that moment, a creature, I suppose a demon, appeared in Slender's massive gob and leapt into Cameron's, forcing it open in his flight. Cameron swallowed. The creature was gone. There was a long silence, which I will abbreviate for the listener's convenience. It had happened so quickly and so oddly that for a moment I doubted my own sanity. Although I am deed and a ghost, and I am not sure a ghost can become a loony if the living person they had been was sane. It's an interesting point, to which I will return at a later date. The creature was not quite what you might expect from the word demon. It was not red or fiery, but grey and glistening with fluid, and its form was more like that of an octopus or squid than of a devil, and yet it moved like a tiny man, running on two of its grey limbs out of Slender's throat and leaping, with its tentacles spinning into Cameron's mouth. A series of expressions passed across my old friend's face. First there was surprise, then disgust, then surprise again, then a kind of calm resignation, then joy, then imbecility. Then he looked suddenly Chinese, then fearful, then loving, then he grinned and his face settled back into something approaching its common expression. So, this was it. Demonic possession was real, and my old friend, Dr. Angus Cameron of Ardenhouse, was now the residence of an evil spirit. After a long while he spoke, and he seemed to be the same man he had been a few minutes earlier. Why had Archie Slender sounded so different when he'd been possessed?
Well, Mr. Slender, your throat is certainly inflamed. Would you mind telling me what work you do? Are you perhaps employed in the asbestos works at Cocky Mucky, or the strontium biscuit factory on the banks of the Weedle? Mr. Slender? Mr. Slender?
He reached out a hand towards his patient and gently shook him, but there was no movement or sound from Slender. His mouth was still open, not quite so wide as it had been, but his eyes were glazed and his body rigid. It was clear that the man was deed.
You have been listening to the Tanach Bray Horror, an episode of Dr. Thinley's Casebook. The cast was as follows: Dr. Cameron, Andrew Crookback; Janet, Barbara Sullen; Dr. Thinley, Bill Simpleton; Archie Slender, Alexander Horsethief. The play was produced by Potty Winkles.
Interesting, indeed moving, as that episode of the Casebook had been, and much as I burned to know what happened in the next episode, this approach was getting me nowhere. The reader may remember that I was recalling an incident in which my beloved cat Doggerel had been kidnapped by the unspeakable Cornelius Bunce, and I was attempting to rescue him. I decided to try another approach. And what that approach was will have to wait until the next chapter of these, The Adventures of Donald McQueen, bibliographer.
Was The Adventures of Donald McQueen, bibliographer. Today's chapter was sponsored by the Bibliographical Society of London and by Schickelgruber's tomato ketchup, the only condiment that can make a rotting rat taste good. It was written and performed by Paul W. Nash, with special guests Elizabeth Crowley, William Hale, Rebecca Howard, Lucy Matheson, Iona Spark, David Stump and Stuart Tiley. The music borrowed themes from Trevor Duncan and Malcolm Lockyer.
Next time in The Adventures of Donald McQueen, Bibliographer.
From the engineers at Power Gears, we present the Mechanical Navvy. Display your wisdom, purchase one. Display your business savvy. Your life of ease will have begun. When you buy a mechanical navvy,
Buy a mechanical navvy.
He never rests, he never tires or nips off to the lavvy. He needs no batteries, plugs or wires. When you buy a mechanical navvy,
Buy a mechanical navvy.
he never shouts at passing girls, he's never coarse or chavvy. He never nicks your cash or pearls. When you buy a mechanical navvy,
Buy a mechanical navvy.
he's always cheerful, humming hymns or playing on the clavichord. He never breaks his limbs. When you buy a mechanical navvy,
Buy a mechanical navvy.
you do not have to pay him squat, a factor of some gravity. He'll not lament his lot. When you buy a mechanical navvy,
Buy a mechanical navvy.
just wind him up and watch him work, or play sitar like Ravi. Employing people, you're a buck. So buy a mechanical navvy, yes, buy a mechanical navvy. If you have a road, a railway or a canal to build, why employ human workers? A mechanical navvy needs no food or rest, never complains and always completes his tasks on time. Why not buy one today? Why not buy two? Why not buy a whole gang of mechanical navvies? They are resistant to snow, rain, hail, dog urine, hurricanes and kicking. The only maintenance a mechanical navvy needs is to be wound up with a key every 40 minutes and to receive an occasional drop of oil upon his elbow. The mechanical workers from Power Gears are not computers. They are not robots in the conventional sense. They are not electronic or electrical and need no power input from batteries or a connection to mains electricity. These workers are 100% mechanical and driven by clockwork. A steam-powered variant is available for some models. Every mechanical navvy is guaranteed against rust, parts failure and rogue killing instincts for 10 years. So why not buy one, or more, today? Also available from Power Gears, the Mechanical Songwriter.
B-7. Now what rhymes with love?
The Mechanical Nun.
Paternoster, keep your hands when I can see them. Bless you, my child.
The Mechanical Hairdresser.
Going anywhere nice on your holidays?
The Mechanical Surgeon.
Scalpel, swab, leech.
The Mechanical Teacher, divisible by subject and key stage. This is GCSE History.
Russian Revolution, League of Nations, nothing too ancient or too recent.
The Mechanical Footballer.
Strike me pink, I've injured me knee and cannot rise from the ground.
The Mechanical Bully.
What are you looking at, eh? What are you looking at?
The Mechanical Sailor.
Heave ho and up she rises.
The Mechanical Bank Robber.
Put the cash in the bag and no one gets hurt.
There is even a Mechanical Bibliographer.
Pi superscript 4, A in square brackets superscript 4, beta I superscript 4, M superscript 4 in square brackets plus and minus M2, N to O superscript 4, P superscript 4 in parenthesis P3 plus Chi1, Q to V superscript 4, X superscript 2, Y superscript 4, Z superscript 2, AA to CC superscript 4, BB superscript